声音特效，哎有 feel 有 feel 哦，全屏，动态模糊，不要垃圾。用控制器，点一下。等我一下啊。达贡系列，这个不知道来源是什么，只有简中哭了，我在擦手板。免费的，但是很吃效能。哦，神哦，随插随切，然后用 PS，免费游戏还做这么方便，哇 ，PS 也可以耶，哦，用心了，用心，用心。因为通常这种免费游戏，它不太会支援 PS， 因为他不想花费时间。哎呦，克苏鲁，还不错哦。你不会遇到困难抉择，快速反应事件或是物品管理元素。在游戏中，你只能跟着剧情穿越各个场景。科博馆啊，这个捧公应该会爱。好 ，Go。
I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain.
大。
Since by tonight I shall be no more.
压力极大，压力山大。游戏中你会找些互动元素，然后一些是短篇故事，一些是彩蛋，然后隐藏的秘密。好哦。
Penniless, and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below.
居然是吸毒仔。
Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death.
这个是在写遗书，是不是？还是大声？
was in one of the most open and least frequent.
Wow. 一下，游戏预设声音太大。
Rented parts of the broad Pacific, that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider.
现在都在讲他的回忆。
The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation. So that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners.
哦，他那时候 ，OK， 他运送，他在一艘船运送东西啊，然后被攻击。匈奴。
So liberal, indeed, was the discipline of our captors, that 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time.
被俘虏之后就跑了，5天。
When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings.
在海上乱飘。
Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of the longitude, I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight. The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land. But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue. The change happened whilst I slept.
睡觉的时候怪怪的。
Its details I shall never know, for my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous.
好可爱哟！
When at last I awoke, it was to discover myself half sucked
Oh,
into a
don't so.
slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see.
卢卡不行了，这是死掉的大乌贼啦！哎呦，它是黑色沼泽哎，关一下窗户。特殊鲁体验机。
and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished. For there was in the air and in the rotting soil a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core. The region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish, and of other, less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren
他已经
immensity.
被卷入异世界了。
There was nothing within hearing, and nothing in sight, save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet. As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position.
一头。
Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions for which innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths.
他现在是很冷静的在强行解释他遇到的状况吗？不可能啊！你已经去到了怪怪的次元了。
So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, straining my ears as I might. Nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things.
他感觉会越走越深呢。
For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun
他在这
moved
边好
across
几
the
个小
heavens.
时，好臭哦。
As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed likely to dry sufficiently
被
for
晒干，
traveling
有那
purposes in
个
a short time.
菊石兽哎，他可以走了。
That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue.
他居然想在这边行走，也是他也没有地方可以去。
On the third morning, I found the soil
这
dry
画面
enough
很
to
好
walk
哎，
upon with ease.
好扯哦，在海上航一航，然后突然地面完全没有水。
The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much
对
concerned
啊，
with
干掉
graver
了。
things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal.
小圆现在声音会太小声吗？太大声？还是刚好？你刚刚不小心动到音效，刚好 OK。我刚刚不知道拉到什么，把它调小声，但好像不是这个游戏的东西。好，你就来体验吧。哎
All
呀
day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other
深海的
elevation
生
on the
物啊！
rolling desert.
屁啦，深海有这种东西吗？这到底是什么？它可以，L1 可以放大哎！刚刚都没有用，看那些触手。这气氛很棒哎！抓，金鱼。出手。
That night, I encamped, and on the following day still
他
traveled
走了
toward
2天
Bahama,
呢，好恶
though that
哦！
object seemed scarcely nearer than when I had first espied it.
什么生物？未知深海生物哎！问号可以看，海洋之巨哦，创造出克苏鲁神话及虚构海底了。 神话中海底有不可能存在的生命，好扯。这好像是真实会有东西耶，深海的东西都不知道是长得怎样。
By the fourth evening, I attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance.
山丘变高了，他走了3天。
An intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill.
还敢睡啊？
I know not why my dreams were so wild that night, but ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain, I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more.
我不能再睡了。
Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again. And in the glow of the moon, I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy.
哎呀，
Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset. Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence.
他就是要登上那个山顶，但是那个山越来越高。
I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me.
可不，
But I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an
好
immeasurable
暗哦，我
pit
看不
or
到啦，这
canyon.
是什么？他现在是在顶端了，是不是？
Whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illumine. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night. Through my terror ran curious reminiscences of Paradise Lost, and of Satan's hideous climb through the unfashioned realms of darkness. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not quite so perpendicular as I had imagined.
他已经疯了。这真的是地平线的边缘吗？
Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent, whilst after a drop of only a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual.
他正要往下爬。
Urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian deeps where no light had yet penetrated. All at once, my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the
怎么有
opposite
石
slope,
碑
which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me.
？What the fuck？
An object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon. That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself. But I was conscious of a distinct impression that its contour and position were not altogether the work of nature. A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express. For despite its enormous magnitude and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith,
巨石阵
whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely. the zenith shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm.
帅。
And revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the Cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures. The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me and unlike anything I'd ever seen in books. Consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales.
真的耶，一堆海鲜。所以，这是外星人呢，外星人在我们的深海里面做事。
Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound. 叙事手法，哦。 还是把一堆克苏鲁相关的那个文件呈现方式写在游戏里面，然后跟你讲一下。哦，第3段克苏鲁的召唤有一个同名游戏，然后类似还什么疯狂山脉、无名之城、超越时间之影。 太深奥了。 Plainly visible across the intervening water, on account of their enormous size, were an array of bas-reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of a Doré. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men. Though the creatures were shown disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto.
鱼人呢？
Or paying homage at some monolithic shrine, which appeared to be under the waves as well.
我们在膜拜这个石碑。
Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint. Grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer. They were damnably
他们脸长这样
in general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips. Glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seem to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background.
好帅哦，这个美术。
For one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale, represented as but little larger than
哎呦，那
himself.
鱼人跟金鱼差不多大哎。
I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size.
这鬼吗？
But in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe. Some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltdown or Neanderthal man
他
was
觉得只
born.
是想象出来的神。
Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me.
斯巴拉西
Then, suddenly, I saw it.
啊！
With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface,
又来
the
了
thing slid into view above the dark
手把一直
waters.
在震动。
Loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scale arms, while it bowed its hideous and gave vent to certain measured sounds.
哎，但他只对着死杯叫，我已经发疯了。
Of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little.
快逃！
I believe I sang a great deal and laughed oddly.
他已经疯了，边唱边跑。爪爪。
Distinct recollections of a great storm sometime after I reached the boat. At any rate, I heard pearls of thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest moods.
下雨了。
When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital.
啊，要剧终了吗？蛋呢？才正开始爽哎。
Brought thither by the captain of the American ship, which had
哇，
picked
被
up
发
my
现
boat in
了。
mid-ocean.
哇，不能继续做梦
In my
了。
delirium, I had said much,
那
but
觉得
found
他已
my
经疯
words
了。
had been given scant attention.
我猜他应该在日常生活又看到那些东西，然后结局这样。
Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew
对啊，
nothing.
这个也是梦日记啊，差不多啦。这是遇难梦日记。
Nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe.
啊，我们只看到那一只大巨人而已。装神弄鬼。
Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god.
他传难回来之后，就对于那个很有兴趣。Dagon， 这个游戏的标题。菲利斯丁人的主神哦。中东地区被称为掌管生命与作物的古代神明。那个今年大贡，被常常误认为是一名雨神，但这个是错误理解。然后在克苏鲁的作品中，大贡是寄宿于海底的鱼人种族哦，就是刚刚看到那个了。但这个人是小说看太多才有幻觉吧？疯了，疯了！我想再去找那个鱼人。
But soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not
那个一定是
press my
真的，
inquiries.
我没有疯。他是一个美国作家，就是他吧？这根本就是粉丝制作的游戏，他在推崇那个作者《克苏鲁神话》的作者。我没有疯，那都是真的。他来这要干嘛？什么都不能按呢、欸。他 来这边看了一下钟，然后就要出去了。
It is at night, especially when the
哎
moon is
呀，
gibbous
疯
and
了！
waning,
每次
that
睡
I see
觉
the thing.
满月的时候睡觉都会看到了。
I tried morphine,
使用吗啡
but，the drug has given only transient surcease and has drawn me into its
所以他这样
clutches as
哦，
a
所以他这样
hopeless
才变成
slave.
吸毒仔。
So now I am to
他
end it
自杀
all,
了，
having written a full account for the information
我没有
for
疯
the。
那
contemptuous
海里面一
amusement
定有
of
那
my
个东
fellow
西
men.，
但是我受不了，我死了。问号。洛夫克拉夫特讨厌烟草，他也不喜欢喝酒。不烟不酒的人，然后想出这么脑洞大开的东西，厉害了。他不需要那些东西就已经很猛了。
Often I ask myself if it could not all have been a pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever as I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat after my escape from the German man of war. This I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideously vivid vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may at this very moment be crawling and floundering on its slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols and carving their own detestable likenesses on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite.
大鱼
I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows to drag down into their reeking talons the remnants of puny, war-exhausted mankind, of a day when the land shall sink and the dark ocean shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium.
疯了疯了！我觉得世界末日就是会被这些海底种族入侵，你们这些人类死定了。这15是真的啊，这群笨蛋！哎，
The end is near.
还没死，哇！
I hear a noise at the door,
有门，
as of some immense slippery body lumbering against it.
哇，他把门挡住哎。他那种咕啾咕啾，他的神要来找他了吗？太
It
棒
shall
了！
not find me.
安安，
God, that hand!
大手，
The window! The
The
window!
window， 快逃！他要来了，我一定要逃走！啊！这里是10楼。耶！耶！他们来了，这里是10楼。我玩的什么？另外一个梦日记。这免费的还好啦。另外一个游戏是什么？这根本就是前导影片。那另外一个游戏要出了，但是是钓鱼的。这个比较像是展示技术力的小品。但那画面真的不错哎，可惜他不以这个特殊的东西去做，他就简单的这样带过。为什么还要继续选项？再看一次
I， hear a noise at the door.
快逃！哇，又玩完了一款。小圆觉得如何？ 真的算轻松小品，你就跑剧情而已，看一个疯子发疯。哎、这个居然极度好评，就算是极度好评的免费游戏，当然是好短。对吧、换个口味，不然我都在忍龙。我肚子饿了，这个轻松的下午结束了，随着跟捧公玩了一个30分的神作，呃，这个炸的，你们干嘛？Division 啊，先这样了，拜拜。